I think it's time to discuss your philosophy of drug use as it relates to artistic endeavor.
Bitch, where's my money? If you want to help me out, you can subscribe to me on Patreon, which is Grimachu, on Subscribestar, which is Grim-Jim, or if you want to make a one-off donation to help support me and keep the channel going, you can do so at paypal.me/JDesborough. Thanks. You know, it occurs to me that my role-playing game career basically spans the open gaming license era. I won't give all the details as I've gone over it a lot recently in various interviews, but I started with Fighting Fantasy, and one of the first things I ever did was to write one of my own game books in a big blotter pad that I had, loosely based on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Very juvenile, very derivative, but there you go. From Fighting Fantasy I progressed to MERP, Dragon Warriors, Twilight 2000, and a panoply of other games, Call of Cthulhu. I produced a fanzine for a while and did some support for play-by-mail games. My first product, I suppose, that I actually sold was some bootleg cyberpunk material sold in photocopied zines at 1991, 1992 Games Fair Eurogen Con. 1995 is when the internet really hit, and while we were getting involved in Vampire LARP and so on at the time, which is great for building a network, I was putting up RPG games for free on a very crude website. Aeolus and Iron Empire were the main ones. Iron Empire was steampunk before it was cool, well before it was cool. 97 to 98 really is when I started taking this kind of stuff seriously, looking into the potential of doing production, setting up a business plan that would have had us in the company of people like Nightfall and so on. Tried to get government grants to set up that company, and our proposal was considered too good for them to give us any money, which meant we didn't have any money to start up and couldn't start up. So what ended up happening was me and my writing partner, Steve Mortimer, ended up emailing every single role-playing game company we could think of to see if any of them had any freelance work or wanted to farm out any support for their games to us. A couple took us up on it. We nearly ended up working on a new edition of Chill, but that fell through when the company kind of semi-collapsed. And Steve Jackson Games were taken with the idea of Munchkin. So from 99 through to 2000, I guess, we wrote the Munchkin's Guide to Power Gaming. That was released, won an Origins Award, first properly professional product. Never reached those heights again. And that's it. We were kind of away to the races, or rather I was. Steve went on to do more normal stuff that paid a lot better. So all of that was pre-OGL. Nobody cared about the zines and so on people were producing. They were flattered that you were supporting their material. When it came to the Munchkin's Guide, there were AD&D spells in it, satirical ones. There was no issue with being sued or anything by TSR at the time, though I guess they were collapsing, so they were busy. Games magazines, actual dead trees pressed flat with stuff printed on them, still existed at the time, like Games Master Interactive, Valkyrie, Arcane. They produced material for all kinds of games and didn't need permission or an open game license to do so. They were able to do so under existing copyright laws and so on, and nobody seemed to give a damn about magazines doing that kind of thing. Bit odd, really. Now we look back and see how afraid everyone is. So the OGL then drops just after 2000, and here in the UK, Mongoose Publishing appears and leapt onto the OGL and exploited it for all it was worth, and was looking to cash in on the zeitgeist. I still had a full-time real job at the time, but I began freelancing for Mongoose and then spread my wings to various others, trying to get out of the RPG humour cul-de-sac that Mongoose kind of put me in. I mean, I'm grateful for the work, I'm grateful for the money, but it was very much pigeonholed. And to break out of that, I began producing my own material. And at this same sort of time, PDFs were taking off, print on demand came along. By the time the Sparkle Trolls were calling for my head, post 2010, I was doing 95% my own stuff and less freelancing, because I like being my own boss and I didn't have to put up with anyone else's shenanigans while I was doing it. So it was an easy enough transition for me to go to pretty much 100% my own stuff. The open gaming license allowed me to browse more open systems as people opened things up, as additional things were retrocloned and released to the public. FazeRip, for example, or OpenD6. Now, using an open system saves a lot of development time, removes a lot of the need for playtesting, which has always been difficult to find people willing to playtest effectively. The dominance of D20 and Dungeons & Dragons has actually been a detriment, I think, to the hobby since 2000 in a lot of ways, apart from that dip where 4th edition came along and everyone decamped. Then the OGL allowed continuity D&D to continue for people who didn't like the new edition. And it also allowed a flowering of the old school Renaissance, which weirdly I seem to be associated with, even though I haven't really produced much OSR material. So I've had my career across the span before the OGL, during the OGL, and now I suppose pretty much after the OGL. It's a headache, but ultimately I've always done my own thing, so I'll be okay. It's just a bit more of a drag. I do, however, worry. I worry about other small creators. It's certainly been an outlet for me and a source of funds for me as a disabled creator, and I know there are other people in the same boat. Even if I disagree with some of the things they try to bring into games, some of the things they try to do to games, I know there's a lot of vulnerable people that rely on hobbies and crafts to get by, to keep food on their table and so on, and I don't think Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro understand that what they have inherited is a craft community rather than a business in the traditional sense. It's more like knitting or woodcraft, something like that, and then they come in trying to say that anyone that uses their bandsaw has to follow their rules. That's not how crafts and hobbies work, really, and it's unfortunate that they seem to think it is. But yeah, it's a headache, but I think ultimately I'll be okay. I have worried in the past about the D&D monoculture and its vulnerability, just like how if you plant fields and fields and fields and fields of the same crop, if you get a blight, it's going to spread across everything. And that's basically what we're seeing now, with a whole bunch of people being hurt and discarded. The big problem for me, though, is how this affects non-D&D OGL. What's going to happen? Are we going to return to Flavor of the Month Fantasy Heartbreakers? Is the OSR going to be able to continue? The only reason I think the OSR has managed to survive in a way Fantasy Heartbreakers never used to is because it's also cross-compatible and seems to appeal to manic collectors, and because it explores that same sort of D&D space but in a lot of new and different and innovative ways, constantly remixing and remodeling, and you can use one product with another by and large. That said, every time D&D has fucked up, other games have moved in to fill the gap, and we've seen a rise in new and interesting things. At the tail end of 2nd edition, where there just wasn't anything coming out. We got Storyteller moving to preeminence, and for good or ill, the long-term effects of a much stronger concentration on narrative and story play, which I think has improved role-playing and has allowed more and different ground to be covered by role-playing games, even if Storyteller wasn't necessarily the best system to do that with. When 4th edition came along, people rejected it, and the OGL allowed them to more easily stay with their old edition by moving to Pathfinder, and I think that's also instrumental in the success and rise of the old school Renaissance. I don't think, if 4th edition hadn't been a complete and total disaster, I don't think the OSR would have gained the ground that it had. And now, with them screwing up, something is going to change, something is going to emerge, whether it's a continuity 5th edition. That seems to be very much still up in the air. The Orc license may make things easier and better for third-party creators such as myself. I'm still worried about special provisions in individual SRDs and so on, morality clauses. But every time in the past, it has been good for everyone else and has marked a turning point. So that's what I expect to see now. And I think my point of view is helpful or useful, having a career that spans before, during, and after the Open Gaming license. I think that gives me some insight and some hope. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think we should still fight, but it's not going to be the end of the world, at least not completely. Zang.
A problem for every games master has always been coming up with adventure ideas. For years now, Postmortem Studios has been helping out with the 100 Adventure Seeds line. These provide adventure ideas for all genres, and you can get them at RPG Now or Lulu.com.